And now, it's time for TJ Wow.
And the first TJ Wow of 2019. Welcome everybody. I am your host, Jo Cook. Looking forward to another great conversation with you today. And this is a lovely quote from J. Cross, that conversation is the most powerful learning technology ever invented. And that's why our discussion webinars are just that, discussions. That's why we're going to be focusing on that and not on PowerPoint. You've got that chat window. Please go and use that and let everybody know your questions, your thoughts, your challenges, your successes. You've already been using that to share with each other. Apologies for the radio silence there, Sarah, but we're back now, so you can use that anytime. Also, what you've got is a question and answer panel. Please go and use that. If you want to make sure 100% answer your question, that would be absolutely brilliant. You can also go and join us on Twitter anytime you like. Go and use #TJWow to tell us some thoughts about what it is that you're learning, and maybe some little nuggets and what it is that people are making you think or kind of challenging you with. That's what we want to know from you. All of our training sessions are recorded, and actually our back catalogue are available online as well. We've been doing this a while now, so we've got all sorts of good things that you can go back and have a look at. What we're going to do now is find out a little bit about our speakers. We have two fabulous speakers, Darryl and Kimberley Hare. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in just a moment. I've known them both for quite a few years, and I'm really, really pleased to have them together. Let me bring in the video right now, and also what I'm going to do is bring in a picture of Darryl. We've had a couple of problems with Darryl's video today. It obviously worked perfect when we were testing it beforehand, and then on the day it didn't work, but that is how these things go. It's one of those things. So we have everybody with us, and let's hear from Kimberley first. Kimberley, apologies for the delay, but can you tell us a little bit, Kimberley, about...
I can, yes. Hi, Jo. Hi, Darryl. Hi, everybody. I love that J. Cross quote. I think that's really brilliant. So I am Kimberley Hare. I am the founder and managing director of Kaizen Training Limited. And you can find my website at kaizen-training.com. And also, as I'll be talking about today, a website called The Heart of Thriving, which I've just put in the chat box. So and I know my hair is very different to what it looks like in the photo. So people probably knew me up until about 8 years ago for transformational leadership development, training trainers, training facilitators, brain-friendly learning, which I've written a couple of books about in the early 2000s. And I've spent a lifetime really helping people develop their skills, their interpersonal skills, their leadership skills. Yeah, as you'll hear, I no longer do that because of something that I've discovered through insight, which is even better than strategies and techniques.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Let me just pop you on mute because we're having a little bit of background noise there. So thank you very much, Kim, for your introduction there. And obviously there's links in the chat window you can go and click on to find out a bit more about Kim. And Darryl, I'm going to unmute you now. Darryl, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Lovely to be here on the... Okay. Is that better, Jo? Hopefully you can hear me a little bit clearer now. Thank you, Jo. That's a lovely introduction. It's great to be here for the first webinar of the new year. I'm an organisational psychologist by profession. I run a business called Strategic Business Networking, which helps people and organisations to connect better with their business partners. So it helps people engage with sales and their customers, charity and donors. And it helps career developers who might be looking for mentors. And that's it really. Obviously there's a strategic business networking LinkedIn group which you can go to and there's also a YouTube channel in that same name.
Thank you, Darryl. And we'll stick with you, Darryl. We can hear you a little bit better now. Sorry that we were struggling at the beginning there. Gosh, we're having technical gremlins on our very first one of 2019. This is not fair, I tell you. Okay, so let's stick with you, Darryl, on just your opening thoughts on our first discussion point of today, which is what interpersonal skills are essential for the modern L&D professional.
It's a very big question. One of the things that I wanted to introduce to sort of kick off the discussion or move it forward is the concept of self-monitoring. So if it's okay, Joe, if I just take maybe a couple of minutes just to explain what I mean by that. So the concept of self-monitoring is about whether people are, on the one hand, high self-monitors, or on the other, they tend towards being low self-monitors. And the background to this is a researcher called Mark Snyder, that's Snyder with a Y rather than an I, who did some work back in the 70s and the 80s, which has been picked up on in more recent times by an academic called Brian Little, a Canadian guy who I believe is at Cambridge. And self-monitoring is about how we show up in a social situation and whether this self-presentation can be shifted or flexed. And I don't know whether you have friends who are like this. I certainly do. You know, you'll have people who are very adept in a social situation. They can switch seamlessly between talking with different types of people. It isn't really a problem for them to be in any kind of social situation and deal with it. On the other hand, I have friends who are, well, it's very much kind of, they are what they are. There's a phrase, WYSIWYG, you know, what you see is what you get. So when they present themselves in social situations, it's really about, well, they have their ideals and their principles, and if people like that, that's fair enough. If they don't, they don't. So what we're saying is high self-monitors are different people depending on the situation. Low self-monitors are essentially the same person, whatever the situation. And there's a kind of food analogy here. On the one hand, an onion. The high self-monitors are like an onion. You'll peel back one layer and you'll get another layer. They relate to a different kind of person, and then you'll get another layer, and so on and so forth. Whereas the low self-monitors are much more like an avocado pear. Okay, they've got that sort of outside, but right to the core is the essential pear core there. And they're not going to change that at all, whoever they're dealing with, whatever situation that they're actually in. So they've got the avocado pear stone. Now, does this matter? That's the key question, whether you're a low self-monitor or a high self-monitor. And research suggests that, yes, it does. It might matter in terms of one's personal life, both in terms of friendships or more intimate relationships. It might matter in terms of one's professional life and perhaps vocational success, and indeed in terms of our general well-being. So if I can just conduct a bit of quick research while we're all on here. If you can imagine a capital Q, so an uppercase Q, and what I'd like you to do in the next few seconds is write that uppercase Q on your forehead. If you go ahead and do that. Okay, now what this is all about is how we have drawn there, each of us, the tail of the Q. Have we put it to the left-hand side as we look at it, or have we put it to the right-hand side? And this is about perspective, because if we put it, say, to the right-hand side, which is the way that you normally see it, this is a low self-monitor person viewing it from their perspective. So perhaps an indication that we might be tending towards being a low self-monitor person. Alternatively, if we put the tail of Q to the other side, then we may well be a high self-monitor person, or at least tending in that particular direction. Now, not sort of high detailed scientific stuff there, writing a Q on our forehead, but it might also sort of give an idea as to what we're talking about today. So that's something I wondered if it might be good to discuss, and I'd really be interested to hear what other people's views are on that. So in the context of self-monitoring being an interpersonal skill.
Well, thank you very much, Darryl, and that's really interesting. I think I went that way around, so I'm not sure what that means, but I bet there are lots of people in offices sitting there doing Qs on their head. So let us know in the chat window, what do you think of that? Which way did you put your kind of the tail of the Q? Or is it all maybe just not quite scientific enough for you? What is it that you're thinking around that stuff? Certainly, I know people who are on the high and the low end of that spectrum, and there's people in the chat window. Gail says, now I'm loving the analogy, the onion versus the avocado. Margaret Burnside has said, L&D is more and more an influencing role. So these skills are essential. So thank you so much, Darryl, for starting that off for us. Kim, let me come to you and unmute you. And that same question.
Yeah, well, I thought that was fascinating. I think I went that way. Not sure, but yeah. So I mentioned earlier that I've kind of completely changed my whole view about this stuff, and especially about how people can best kind of serve themselves and others in their relationships, and how they can develop. So I might be a bit controversial, so forgive me. But you may have seen a formula which is P equals P minus I. I've actually, as well as I've just posted my my book there, and also the on my web page I've just put a temporary page up as a blog, which shows you all of these little things that I'm going to mention. But so the first P stands for performance, equals the second P, which stands for potential, which I believe is by definition infinite, minus I, which is interference. And I believe that interference is always 100% thought. So I think we live in a busy mind epidemic. It seems to be getting worse and worse as people struggle with busy lives and information and stress and so much going on. And what I've seen insightfully over the last 10 years or so is that the thing to do is to come back to, like, we need to try and reduce the noise. We need to reduce the interference. And that's what I spend all of my time helping people do these days. So it's a very subtractive understanding rather than an additive one. And I'm saying that when we get rid of that interference, we fall back out of our personal thinking into our factory setting, our default setting, which is innately clarity, peace of mind, well-being, and wisdom. And we have the most incredible resource that most people don't even begin to tap into, which is a kind of an inner sat-nav, an inner GPS, if you like, which is in the moment wisdom and creativity that can guide us. And if you think for yourselves about times when you've just kind of been in the flow and your interpersonal skills have been working really well and you're connecting deeply, and you're just really interested in what's going on and you're interested in the other person, everything just flows and everything's 100 times easier, versus when you're in your head, having a whole load of thinking. So one of the analogies I use is that of a snow globe. You know, you've all seen a snow globe. And if you think of the snowflakes inside the snow globe as being like your thoughts, what we often do, especially if we're stressed or we've got too much on, or we don't feel we're really getting to a place of connection with the other person is we tend to shake it up more, and that just adds to the noise. And so I'm going to argue that actually teaching people a whole load of more skills and strategies and how-tos and techniques is just adding more interference. And that when we can come back to that place, I call it home, that place of home, we just operate as the best version of ourselves, and we operate with that in-the-moment wisdom, that clarity, that creativity. And so over the last 10 years or so, working with clients, both on my workshops and retreats and also inside my corporate clients, I found that people can just, as I say, have the most amazing transformations, not through trying to add anything, not through trying to change who they are, but by just showing up, being in the present moment, and relying on that inner resource.
Thank you, Kim. What another great start. So we've had two kind of slightly different things from Darryl and Kim, but actually I think working really well together. And Kim had mentioned that idea of being in flow, and I don't know about anybody else, but I certainly remember flow theory from when I was studying psychology, and I've put the psychologist's name in there, and I am going to pronounce it because I did learn how to do it. So it's one of the few things I remember from my psychology studies. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I have not learned how to spell that, though. I still just have to Google for the theory. So spelling comes another day. But that's a really nice kind of theory about when you're in that zone. And certainly the idea of adding more skills can be a little bit counterintuitive, that idea of you don't need more skills, because perhaps that's a way that we've been programmed. The way that we kind of think about this is, well, let's go on a course, let's go to somewhere and learn new skills on things, rather than quietening things down and listening. And Margaret Burnside says, I don't think we look at interference enough. And as Kimberley says, keep adding more and more skills and techniques. However, the interference will need skills to help deal with it, maybe. So there's an interesting one. We'll perhaps come back to that in a moment. Darryl, let's come to you. And this idea of it's not necessarily all about the skills and techniques, but let's put it on its flip side for a moment. Are there skills and techniques that we do need or we should use? You're coming through really quiet again, Darryl, so let's just try connecting again. It's not, but keep going because it might come through a little bit louder in a moment. We're having some technical gremlins today, so let's keep going, Darryl, and see how we go.
That is worth looking at. I took completely Kim's point about subtractive rather than additive, and I suppose one of the things that I'd probably like to go back over with Kim is, how then do you actually get those methods across to people without it sounding like you're adding another technique to them? But anyway, coming back to self-monitoring, I suppose the idea is that it's something that could be adaptive, in that it's a trait that helps an individual to function well in society. So from that point of view, it's worthwhile looking at and investigating further.
So tell us a bit more, Darryl, about how can that really help us? If we're high on that already, do we need to do more work on it? And if we're low on it, can that be changed? Because I definitely know a few people who are low, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure they could change, even if they wanted to. So how could we tackle that?
The message that traits are fixed. And of course, if you take something like MBTI, it's a type indicator, let alone anything that talks about traits. So it perhaps suffers from the fact that it involves labels, which people tend to take on board and assume that things can't be changed. But there's another body of work which is around free traits, which allows you in effect to act out of character. So that's one sort of point I put forward, and I'm interested to know whether anybody has sort of heard of that and what their own experience might be of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, especially when we're under stress or duress, or we want to change something and maybe we're trying, but things are kind of coming out a little bit wrong. And Gail, before we move on back to Kimberley, Gail actually says in the chat, do they want to change? Does the onion want to, the onion may want to change, but would the avocado want to change as well? Any thoughts on that, Darryl?
Which say it's very difficult if someone is one end of a scale. Do they actually have the wherewithal to move towards the other end of the scale? But when people, the strange thing is when people get involved in core projects, when people get involved in personal projects which are important to them, sometimes from an emotional point of view, it's amazing how often they are able to go beyond what would normally be their assigned traits. And it's at that point that they can exercise these free traits, these ways of acting out of character in order to achieve those core projects or personal projects that are important to them.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Darryl. And I can see some questions coming in the question pod. Thank you very much for those. We will get to them, I promise. Kim, let's come back to you on this about, can people change if they want to?
Well, I don't think they have to change. I think they're absolutely fine as they are when they show up as their true selves, if you like, rather than this kind of shield that many people have around them, which is all of this interference that I was talking about. So, you know, can I just give some examples of that interference typically that I see? So we, all of us, you know, as human beings, we construct stories about ourselves, about other people, about the world. And so often people are kind of, they live in the story rather than what's actually going on. In other words, they're in their heads rather than in the relationship. That's a very big source of interference. Often people are kind of in the future or in the past rather than in the present moment. So they're just, again, not really showing up to what's happening right now. And when you do that, when you do show up, something, I don't think it's magic, I think it's just very, very natural, but you start to see the other person or the group as real human beings, and you start to take yourself, and by that I mean your small self, your egoic self, you start to kind of not get rid of that, but just kind of ignore it. It ceases to be relevant. So you see them as real human beings, you tend to connect much more deeply, you stop trying to win or save face or any of that kind of stuff. And you know, people don't know often that they are fundamentally okay without the thinking about themselves, without the insecure thinking. They don't know that they have innate resilience, peace of mind, clarity. And so that results in insecurity, that kind of egoic thinking, stress, mistrust, defensiveness, you know, self-protecting, all of those kinds of behaviors. And when people do that, it reduces their energy, obviously their engagement, their clarity, their connection, and they also stop listening. They stop really listening to the other person. And until now, organizations have tended to treat that as though it's a skill-based problem, and I don't think it is. And it's not a lack of motivation either. It's a function of the quality and clarity of people's thinking and how well they understand what's actually going on and how their mind works. So more skills training isn't the answer. You could send 100 managers on the best leadership program in the world, and the impact it would have would still vary along a bell curve depending on their emotional resilience, and their understanding of the way life works. So it affects every aspect of performance. So this is not about adding any more techniques. This is about, I mentioned earlier, it's an insight-based understanding. So through conversation, through pointing people back inside, people start to have their own profound and transformative insights about themselves, about the world, about other people, and they stop. It's kind of like seeing through the thinking that's holding you back. It's not trying to change it or fix it or manage it or add anything different. You see through it like the illusion that it is. And then light. No, I was just going to say, as well as getting easier, life just becomes much more thriving. That's why I call my work The Heart of Thriving. It becomes more fun, more playful, more light-hearted. You give other people the benefit of the doubt. You don't hold grudges. And because you feel great about yourself and your life, you tend to feel great about everybody else as well.
Thank you, Kim. As you know, I'm managing the microphones for people today due to a few technical problems, so that's why I cut Kim off there. It wasn't intentional, I promise. Thank you, Kim. I think you've said some amazing stuff in there. Margaret says, so this is about understanding emotional intelligence more, and I think that's a really good point. And I really like that you're talking about what we're feeling and our emotions and being in tune with that, rather than listening to the anxiety and the negativity. That's certainly how I'm picking up on that. I've got a question for you, Kim, and then we'll come to Darryl in a moment, thinking about where people rate themselves in terms of their skills. But let's come to you, Kim, first with a question from Margaret in the question panel. Thank you, Margaret. Margaret asks, how do you think 360 feedback?
Okay. Yeah, great question. God, I'm going to get even more controversial now. Because I believe that the mind only works one way, which is inside out rather than outside in. I think that, you know, so we're 100% of the time living in the feeling of our own thinking rather than the feeling of the world or the feeling of our external circumstances. So it's a kind of an inside job. So I've seen 360-degree feedback be helpful, but only where, you know, for me it only works really well where people have already got that kind of understanding of themselves and their own mind. In other words, we're not really, even with great 360 tools, the person receiving the feedback is everything is being interpreted through their own thinking about it. So you're never kind of getting an accurate picture. You're getting a picture which is kind of being interpreted. It's all an interpretation. So so yeah, I would focus instead these days on educating people to better understand who they are, and when they tap into that inner sat nav, what I find is that their interpersonal skills and everything else tend to go through the roof because it's kind of because they're clear. And they don't have all this fuzziness and noise going on, which is distorting everything that's coming at them.
It does. Thank you very much. And I think you've got some great points there. And Margaret said in the chat window about her question, I thought that would stir up a controversial view, and I've suggested that Margaret's being naughty. But no, it's a really important question to ask because so many people and organisations use the 360-degree format. Margaret is suggesting that perhaps with the interpretation of a good coach, it can help people be more objective. So it's all about how you use that tool rather than bashing people over the head with it, which is what we've seen a lot of. So Darryl, let's come to you on this one. So Darryl, first of all, if you've got anything to add to the 360-degree feedback thoughts, please let us know.
The feedback that one might receive. I mean, I certainly remember working for an organisation that went through the 360-degree process when it was very popular, and what you got at the end of the day was a couple of sheets of paper to read. Without any sort of guidance on how to interpret it, where those views might have come from, how might you react to it, how might you understand it. So you know, definitely not the right way to do it, in my particular view, anyway. Yeah, so you know, there's that.
Yeah, and actually, Margaret's just said in the chat window, that's outrageous, and still happens. I think that's the case in lots of parts of our industry, isn't it? Carry on, Darryl.
A subtractive understanding rather than an additive one. So we don't need to worry about loading people on with new techniques, new tools. I'm just still wondering about how you actually get people's minds to quieten down. If that's the right phrase, Kim, forgive me if it isn't.
Okay, well, let's come back to Kim on that one. I'll save this question for you in a moment, Darryl. So I think that's a really, really great shout. So
Oh, well, that's interesting. It's not so much that for me. It's not about stopping thinking. I don't think that's possible, certainly not for very long. We're thinking creatures. It's, as I said earlier, it's understanding the nature of thought and dissolving it so that it doesn't have any impact on you. It's kind of like, you know, realizing that you can have a thought that says, I'm worthless and I couldn't possibly do that presentation to the CEO. And you could have a thought that says, oh, look, there's a robin redbreast. And you take them both equally seriously, which is kind of not at all. So it's never the thought that's the problem. It's thought believed. It's thought that doesn't look like thought, it looks like truth. And those are the things that get in our way. So through conversation, it's not about techniques to have people quieten their mind. Their mind goes quiet naturally and automatically when they start to go, oh yeah, that's just thought, isn't it? That's not real. Thoughts are transient, they're insubstantial, they're not made of, like, it's not made of real stuff. And as I said, they're constantly changing and constantly moving. So to base your whole life and your decisions and your relationships on this kind of transient stream of formless energy is crazy. So people learn to rely instead on this inner GPS, this sat-nav, this wisdom that I was talking about, and their feelings, a kind of a feeling of, as I said earlier, being at home and just, you know, when you just know what to do, you know it's the right thing to do. And there's no, oh, should I do A or should I do B? No, it's just crystal clear. So it's, as I said, it's not about stopping thinking. Our minds are built, they're designed to come back to that innate clarity and peace and quiet when we stop taking our thinking so seriously?
Yeah, I think I like the bit through conversation. I think, you know, that is definitely a way.
Thank you, Kim, so much on that. Darryl, let's unmute you. What are your thoughts?
To me, that it sort of sounds a bit like CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, but I don't know whether Kim say definitely not. I don't know. Yeah. Let's go back to sort of self-monitoring.
Behavioural therapy is all about retraining what you're thinking, and so this is a different thing altogether, I think.
Yeah. They're different people depending on the situation. The low self-monitors are the same person, whatever the situation. And Gail, I think, a few questions ago, asked the very important question: do they want to change? And I suppose that's one of the things about it, because if you think about how a high self-monitor might view a low self-monitor and vice versa, the low self-monitor would probably look at this person who's very adept socially, and, you know, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't be very complimentary about them. You know, they might think that they're a bit sort of two-faced or even multi-faced. So Gail's question about do they want to change, would they want to change, is a very appropriate one. Because, of course, from their point of view, as a low self-monitor, they're the same person, whatever the situation, and their point is, this is who I am. I don't get the need to change. Why should I? But I suppose the situation there is how they might be perceived in a social situation and whether they are being flexible enough according to the circumstances.
I really like that, Darryl. That certainly really resonates with my understanding of the subject, which is very, very small, but also just with my experience, you know, from a social point of view, that really resonates. And Margaret's question in the chat window was, do you think that some people rate themselves higher on these skills than they actually are? So if you ask most people in the country if they're a good driver, they're going to say yes. But we all know from the amount of drivers that there are around us that not everyone can be good drivers. What are your thoughts on that, Darryl? And does it have an impact? If I'm thinking I'm higher or lower than I actually am, does it matter?
Are probably superbly confident of their skills, and, you know, at a very extreme end, it might border on some kind of pathology in terms of the way that they act and behave. At the other end of the scale, with the very low self-monitors, they are going to be stuck into a mode of, well, you know, when I behave in this way, I'm being sincere. It is my authentic self. I don't perceive or see the need to behave in any other way. So I suppose it's you know, it's a bit of an argument for if you're towards the end, either end of that scale. Is there some insight that you can be given which will allow you to think about the other end of the scale and see whether it's worthwhile, you know, adapting your behaviour in some way to just to normalise it a bit more, I suppose.
And I think that's something I often come back to, is with any of these kind of skills, we have to have that self-awareness. Because if we don't have that, to ask that question of ourselves and honestly answer it one way or another, rightly or wrongly, change or not, then actually we can't progress. We can't be curious because we don't have that ability to be able to do it. That's an observational approach. That's not an evidence-based approach. Thank you, Darryl. Let's come back to Kim on this. We're going to go into our reflection very, very soon, guys. So start thinking about what you're actually going to do after today's session. But Kim, let me come to you on what we've discussed so far, and if you've got anything you
I think that, I mean, certainly there are people that rate themselves higher than other people would rate them, and there are also an awful lot of people who rate themselves worse than other people would rate them. So, you know, I think that and I come across both extremes. Again, it's kind of, for me, it's about, there's something really, when we stop over obsessing about ourselves and how we're coming across and our skills and how we could, you know, do better, achieve more all the time, there's something that seems to kick in, which is just a very natural, I don't know, personable likableness. You know, it is that, you know, you don't have to do anything to show up as authentic. You just have to be you.
So I really like that. Margaret says it's about being human. And it sounds really simple to say it. But what I question is, I can turn up just being me. Great. But the me that's inside is really sarcastic. And that comes across really badly to a lot of people. So I can't just be me because other people find that I come across, shall we?
Yes, okay. Well, let me challenge you. I would argue that it's a question of level. Deep down, I don't believe you are very sarcastic. I think that is something that you have developed, that you've mastered, that you've honed, and you know, I don't know, maybe a self-protection mechanism. It is for a lot of people, as is, you know, being a clown is a protection mechanism. So I don't think that is the real you. I wouldn't say this to you or anybody else on this call, but certainly most of my clients would say to me, after a little while of working together, I've never even met the real me yet. It's all been a story. And then they start to dismantle that story, and suddenly a whole load of new potential shows up.
Thank you. Sorry for the pause there with the mute button. I think there's some really good stuff in there, Kim, and I'll take your therapy session on another day about my sarcasm and the issues I have with that. But no, it's a really good point about what I feel is real versus, well, actually, is that something else? And I can see where this is really powerful. Gail says, yeah, my real name is Blunt. So appreciating that, Gail. Thank you. And Margaret saying, who am I? Well, Margaret, I know you're lovely. I'm not sure that's what you're trying to say here. But Margaret says, this is similar to Julie Starr's work on ego and stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Yeah, I think that's something that I was alluding to there, Margaret, is I keep hearing in these different conversations, like, that's not you, that's your story. That's what you've told yourself. So I think we are going to pause there and go into some quick reflection. So let's say goodbye to Kimberley from the webcam, but she is staying online, as is Darryl. We're going to speak to them again before we finish. And let's go into some reflection. So before we use the whiteboard, I think you all know the drill. Let's go and practice with the text tool. So go and please click on the T text tool and then click on the whiteboard. Type your name if you would be so kind, and then click away. And what you should then be able to see is your name. And if not, that's no problem. So if you have any troubles with that, just let me know. But just go and click on that T text tool, click on the screen. Because we're going to come into a reflection and think about what it is that you are going to do after today's session. So let's go and make sure we can all get our names on there. And if you can't, it's no problem. We've got to back up because, you know, something else could go wrong today, and you never know what it's going to be. So we do have a backup if that's not working. But just make sure you click away on the writing, and that should reveal it to everyone. Now I can only see mine at the moment, so if we're having any problems, do let me know. Thank you, Margaret. That's working lovely. You've got that perfectly in line, Margaret, with the T of TJ in the background there. Thank you. So let's use that whiteboard now to go and answer the question. Oh, you found the move tool as well. Thank you, Debbie. Let's go and have a look at this and say, well, what's your action point from today? We've had an amazing discussion here, and different from what I thought it was going to be. I thought the conversation was going to be about communication skills and influencing skills and all sorts of things like that. But it's been so much deeper is what I've come across today. But I'd love to know your thoughts. If for some reason the whiteboard isn't working for you, it's no problem. You can just go and use that chat window instead. It's absolutely no problem at all. And I can see Kim's in the chat window saying, Joe will probably want to punch me. I don't think you have to do anything. I don't want to punch you, Kim, I promise. You see, there's a sarcastic comment in my head waiting to come out now. Okay, so do go and share some thoughts about what you're going to do after today. I really like what Margaret has shared here about Julie Starr's work actually on ego and stories we tell ourselves. So I think that's something that I want to go and look up, because I think it's something that as humans we can hold on to these things quite a lot, and as Kim said, it's about getting in the way. And I think, to Darryl's point, for me this is about my understanding of myself in those different situations. So I really like that. Darryl in the chat window has put "Vive la différence." Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Darryl. So either on the whiteboard or in the chat window, what's your action point from today's session? And we've got lots of do nothing, some stars going up next to do nothing. Some more thinking to do around this. Am I
a question you can do as a scale in order to set out whether you come across as a low self-monitor or a high self-monitor. Joe will be posting a link towards the end of the session, which is a link to Brian Little, where he talks about his book, which is called Me, Myself and Us. So if you can grab a copy of that book, I think it's chapter 3, something like that. There's actually a scale of questions that you can complete so that you can assess yourself, basically.
Brilliant. Thank you, Darryl. And any last sort of summary thoughts on today's conversation?
I think it's been really interesting, and I echo your comments about it not being what you thought it would be, because I think we've had two people here who have come up with very diverse topics, but I think there is some overlap. Being human, I think there's some overlap, because I think the very important work that Kim does helps people to be human, in my understanding, in my perception. And I'd also say that this business around self-monitoring and perhaps understanding better where you are and whether you can travel a little bit further in either direction according to where you are, allows you to be more human, allows you to have, I don't know, an easier place in society. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is the business about just be you, just be yourself, be authentic. In some of the work that I've done, a lot of people have answered that question by saying, I don't really know who I am. And I think some of what I've said, some of what Kim has said is about helping people understand who they are, who they really are, and getting down to the nub of it, really. So although on the face of it, there might not seem to be too much common ground, I think, I would point to those two things, being human and also just being you and finding out who you are as two particular areas.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Darryl. Really nice summary from you there. And also, Darryl will be happy to see that somebody's put on the white whiteboard practice drawing a Q. So also on the whiteboard we have somebody who said remember to focus on the person behind the skills and challenge some work we do on interpersonal skills and look more at authenticity. Some really lovely stuff. And Kimberley, let's come. So Kim, I can't hear you at the moment. Perhaps we've lost Kim right at the last hurdle, but never mind. Is she back? Yes, what's your final thought?
Okay, just to say really quickly, yeah, I agree with Darryl. Be human, show up, be present, and put the snow globe down.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Kim. And with that, we're going to just go into our wrap up today. Thank you so much for being on our first webinar of 2019. Thank you, Darryl, and thank you, Kimberley, as well. Absolutely stunning conversation. Could have spoken to either of you for an hour and gone into all sorts of depth, including why my sarcasm is such a defense mechanism. But sadly, that's all the time we have today. Both Darryl and Kimberley have got loads of material online. Go and have a look at their websites and all sorts of stuff. Go and follow them on Twitter. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. Also, what you can do is continue the conversation, share your thoughts and your learning nuggets on TJ Wow. If you're not already following Training Journal on Twitter, why on earth not? You can go and find us there. Also, you know that the recording will be available online, including this recording very, very soon, so that you can actually go and share that with other people if you want to. And when we're thinking a little bit into the future, next month we have another webinar. Oh, I haven't got the date on there. That is February the 5th, I think that one is. How can you use storytelling, humour and music and art in learning? And Stephanie and Doug are both brilliant L&D people and artists in their own right. So I'm really, really looking forward to that conversation. Thank you to you guys as well in the chat window. You have been brilliant, and we will see you next month. Bye.